In today's video, we're going to talk about the building blocks of screenwriting. Things like what is an act, a sequence, or a scene, and how they actually help you with your creative process, which will lead us to one of my favorite parts of screenwriting, which is using cards. You know me, I always talk about cards. So we'll talk about that using cards a little later when we do the writing exercise. Now, this video is a part of a series on how to write your idea from conception to first draft. And I'll link the previous lesson above me. Now, even if you're not following my step-by-step guide, writers need to understand how these building blocks of screenwritings, how acts, sequences, and scenes help in their writing process, and why they can save us some valuable time and our sanity. Now, traditionally, most movies are written in a 3-act structure, which normally we see them labeled as Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. They could also simply be labeled as simply as beginning, middle, and end. Now, Act 1 is about 25% of your script and is the setup for your movie, which is why it's sort of the beginning of your movie. We learn about the day-to-day lives of the world, of the characters. Act 1 contains your inciting incident or the thing that upsets the day-to-day balance of the characters. It's like when in Lord of the Rings, Frodo suddenly discovers he has the One Ring. Now, the end of Act 1 is normally the point of no return for our main character. Using the Lord of the Ring analogy again, it's when Frodo and Sam leave the Shire. That's the end of Act 1, and you can look at the rest of that, or the previous part of that movie, and see how the beginning act works out. Now, Act 2 is about 50% of your script, and is where most of the conflict of the movie is based. Now, personally, I think this is one of the hardest acts to write through as well. Typically, when people stop writing on a project, they get lost in the second act. It makes perfect sense, right? It's the biggest of all 3 of the acts. And this is a reason why with this way that we've been approaching screenwriting, we've been doing so much work to make sure we're armed with enough material and a good game plan so that we can power through the second act, so that we don't stop in the doldrums of the second act, that we can plow through and finish our screenplay. This is why we've been working on stuff like character webs and subplots. Now, some things to keep in mind for this act, for Act 2, is that the character will have some type of change happen during the midpoint of this act. And many times the goals of the main character are redrawn based on things that happen in this act. So if they were going to go to point A, stuff in that act could actually mean that they're actually going to go to point B instead, because that's what they need to do. Now, the second act ends with the climax and the crisis being unavoidable for the main character to sidestep. So in Act 3, if you're keeping up with the math, it must be 25% of the script. And this is where the climax and crisis are resolved. The princess saves the prince from the dragon. Frodo throws the Ring of Power into the volcano. Luke blows up the Death Star. That's all in the third act. So Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 are the major parts of the screenplay. But acts can actually be broken down into smaller bits. And they can be broken down into 2 smaller bits, sequences and scenes. I know scenes are the smallest piece that you can actually break a screenplay down into. And I think a lot of us probably have a good understanding of scenes, but I know for myself, when I first started screenwriting, sequences were a little tricky for me. So let's start with sequences. Now, a sequence, according to Jeff from Fast Screenplay, is a series of scenes that changes the direction of the story. Now, typically, most sequences are 2 to 5 scenes or about 3 to 20 pages, though there's not a number per act per se. You don't need like 5 sequences per act 2 or anything like that. So don't worry about that. So after a sequence of scenes, the character should be in a more positive place than they were before, and a more negative place than they were before. Now, an example, let's say a character discovers a magical sword. And so there's sort of 2 different ways the next sequence can go. It could be a negative sequence where he learns that the sword is cursed and they can never release it again. So that would be a negative sequence. Or maybe a positive sequence is that he finds out this enchanted sword is the only sword that can defeat the bad guy. So that's an example of a sequence where it's becoming more positive, and the sword being a cursed sword is one that leads to a more negative outcome. Now, another important point is that your sequences should be moving forward to your climax and your crisis. Now, finally, the smallest piece of a screenplay is a scene. Now, again, a scene is, according to Jeff from Fast Screenplay, is a specific event or action that moves your story forward. Now, normally each scene happens in one place and in one moment in time. They tend to be about 1 to 3 pages in length. Now, some examples of scenes from popular movies, it would be like Luke in the Wampa Cave on Hoth, Harry Potter riding the Hogwarts Express, or Sally and Harry talking in the diner. Now, the biggest thing, though, is we need to remember about a scene is that something needs to happen. I can't tell you, as a movie critic as well as a screenwriter, how many times I've watched a movie and nothing happens in the scene. It's just there for filler. You know, we see the character walk to the market. Okay, so what does that really add to the movie? Now, if it's, I liked when in The Professional, where the little girl is walking back from the market, where her family's being killed by these terrorists or these police officers. I forget exactly who they were, but you know, walking back from the store, you have that tension. So something is happening in that scene. It's not just her going to the store to pick up some milk. There's something actually happening. So again, the biggest thing in your scene, something needs to happen. So, and even if the characters are talking, they can't be talking just about their day unless that leads to something. So basically, you only get so many scenes to make a movie, so make sure that each one counts. So we got done with explaining the basics of how a movie is broken down into acts, scenes, and sequences, and we know the function of each. Now it's time to use, again, one of my favorite things, cards. You know, I always talk about them all the time. And I'm gonna have you pull out 48 cards. I'm gonna have you divide them into 3 piles. Yes, you could use the electronic ones on your software program, but for today, I want you to use real ones. You know, you can just cut out sheets of paper too, to basically the same size, and use those as well too. But I like the tactile feel of these cards. Now, the first pile, I want you to count out 12 cards. The second pile, I want you to put 24 cards down. And in that third pile, if you're doing your math like me correctly, it should be another 12 cards. So that's 25% for the first act, 50% for the second act, and again, 25% for the third act. So let's head over to the writing exercise to see what we're gonna do with these cards. Today, we're gonna fill out all of our 48 index cards. Now, don't worry, you might need a couple more. 48 is just a number, so don't stress out if you have to use, if you have 46 or if you end up with 52 or something like that. So now I want you to take a look at your outline and determine how many sequences you have and lay those together in each pile. So if you have, let's say you're 12 and you have 3 sequences, that'd be 4 cards apiece, right? So you have 4 cards, and just have them in that same pile together. So you have your 4 scenes that make up a sequence, and you can put them in that first pile for Act 1. Next, I want you to break down each scene, and each card is going to be a scene. So write a little on the front, which explains what the scene is, and then if you have any important notes on the scene, I want you to write them on back. Now, hold on to these cards because they're going to be helping us as we move closer to getting to that first draft. So that's all you have to do today is just work on the cards you'll have, and just do the best you can. And like I said, no stress, but this is going to help us sort of be able to flesh out different scenes. Now, if you had any aha moments, put them down in the comment section below. What have you learned about screenwriting elements? Have you learned anything new? Was it interesting to find out about scenes or sequences? Leave that in the comment section below. Hi, if we're meeting for the first time, my fellow screenwriting enthusiasts. My name is Paul from Small Town Movie Critic. If you're new to the channel, we're all about helping you write that kick-ass screenplay by giving you tips, tools, inspiration, and product reviews. If you feel like this is the type of content that would be good for helping with your screenwriting endeavors, feel free to hit the subscribe button below. Also, take a look at my other content as well too, that goes deeper into screenwriting. Also, we do have one of my favorite videos that people love watching is my what screenwriting software to use for 2021. We'll be coming out with the screenwriting software for 2022 here in the next week or two. And as we do each and every week, I'd like you to welcome all of our new subscribers. And this week, I'd like to welcome David, and I'll leave his name up here so you can see his last name as well too. Thank you for walking with me through our collective screenwriting journeys. I wish you all luck in your future writing and filmmaking endeavors. Now, my hope for you this week is that your writing goes well and your rewriting goes well. I hope you've been able to carve out some time so you can work on that next kick-ass screenplay, because only you can make that next blockbuster that'll help other people fall in love with storytelling like we all do. So until the next video, keep writing and have a blessed day.